Welcome to the Notion of Life series, in which we are creating the ultimate Notion system that helps you get more result with less effort. In the last video, we had a look at the monthly review, which is a monthly process that we use to end our previous month and to start our upcoming month with clarity and intent. In today's video, we are covering one of the coolest, but also one of the most complex parts of the system. And these are the reflection databases. These two databases form the backbone of the entire system. So it's going to be a very interesting video. But before we dive into that, as always, some practical information. If you think I'm not already talking fast enough, you can speed up my speech in the little thingy down below. I also added timestamps in the description so you can easily scroll through the video. And of course, all the links, assets, and resources mentioned in this video are linked in the description down below. Reflection can be considered the art of looking inward. It's like a mirror that reflects back light, but instead it's our conscious mind that is reflecting back our thoughts, our speech, and our actions. This can happen in sort of two different ways. So let's explore the first one. This circle over here is the self. This is us. This is everything that we experience, everything that's happening inside of us. As we are moving through the world, we are taking certain actions. We're either doing this through speech or we're doing this through actions with our body. So I'm moving through the world and I decide to approach someone. I give them a compliment. Or perhaps I'm going to the gym and I'm lifting some weights. Or perhaps I am giving a presentation for the work that I'm doing. Or perhaps I'm going to the grocery store to get some food for dinner tonight. I'm always taking all of these actions. But it is very possible for me to just go through the world my entire life without ever reflecting on those things that I'm doing. And that is where reflection comes in. It's like we have a mirror around us to reflect back. That's why the word reflection is used, to reflect back these things that I'm doing to myself. So, okay, I went out and gave someone this compliment, and then later I can think about that compliment that I gave. And maybe I can ask myself the question, did the person like getting that compliment? Was it an honest compliment, or was I just saying that to be nice? Likewise, for my presentation, I could think back, okay, did I actually transmit that message that I wanted to transmit? Was I confident in my posture? Was my presentation of high quality? We can start using our conscious mind to dissect these actions and this speech that we've taken, and to see if there's any lessons that can be learned there. So that is what we use reflection for when it comes to our outward behavior, right? We're constantly moving through this world. We're doing things all the time. And then we use this mirror. We use our conscious mind to reflect back lessons and insight from those actions that we take, and then internalize those, which is something we're going to talk about more in depth in a little bit. Then the second option that we have, and once again, we have this circle of the self over here, is everything that is happening inside of me, right? And we could actually make the argument that anything in life is happening inside of us, but this right here is everything that's happening inside. All my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions. The outside world doesn't see this, but there's a lot happening inside of me, right? I might have an insecurity. Is my hair looking good? Are my glasses clean? Are people going to judge me for doing this video right now? I might also be thinking, I really, really like that girl, but not quite sure if I'm confident enough to approach her. I might also feel that I'm getting a bit fat, or maybe actually I'm feeling quite good because I've been lifting some heavy weights in the gym and I've been making progress. There's all these thoughts that are continuously going on in my mind. And I think it wouldn't come to a surprise to anyone if I said that we're always chattering with ourselves. The entire day, we're having these conversations with ourselves. It's like we're narrating the story of our own life, right? We're all in this Morgan Freeman movie and we're just narrating the own story of our life. And all these thoughts, all these feelings, all these emotions are happening inside of us. And the same goes here for the outside world. We could be moving through our entire life without ever reflecting on those things that are happening inside of us. We could just let them happen. We could just be swayed into this maelstrom of thoughts and feelings without ever stopping to take stock of the situation. And that's once again where we can use our conscious mind to reflect back these things to ourselves. So I can have this insecurity, but then I can think about that insecurity and I can ask myself the question, well, but does it really matter if my glasses would be dirty? Or if I really like that girl, well, what would be the problem if I got rejected? And what might I be rejected for? And is that something I can mitigate? So we can think about our thoughts, right? That's a very unique human capability, metacognition. We can think about our thinking. We can think about our thoughts. We can observe our thoughts, our feelings. And that is this internal level of reflection. And those things then, once again, are reflected back out and they become part of us. And then later we can use that also to act differently in the world, right? Because this is ultimately what it all boils down to, right? Over here, once again, we have this circle of the self. This is us moving through the outside world, but also everything that moves through us in the inside world. And let's say, for example, that I have this thought. I would really like to approach that girl, but I'm a little bit nervous. Then I might reflect on that and think to myself, yes, that is true, but I would rather fail at something than regret something. Right now, I've taken this insight and then I actually decide to make the approach. That is something I do in the external world. I actually approach this girl. And unfortunately for me, the girl already has a boyfriend and she tells me, well, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I can't give you my phone number. I already have a boyfriend and I get rejected. Then I can reflect back on that rejection and either think to myself, was it something that I did wrong? Like, did I approach her too strongly? Or does she genuinely have a boyfriend? I can then start thinking about the thing that happened and once again draw lessons from that, which I can internalize. And the next time something like this happens, I will have a different frame of mind because now I've learned from this thought process, I've learned from this experience, and the next time I see a girl, I know, hey, I might get rejected because actually I had food on my face and that wasn't a very hygienic move. Or I might think, well, I got rejected because, sometimes girls have a boyfriend. So I learn from this experience. And then the next time that might potentially change my behavior. And this is just one example, but we're doing this continuously, right? We're constantly moving through the world. But the question to us is, do we reflect on the things that we do? Yes or no? Because I could also have just gotten that rejection and afterwards just thought to myself, well, that sucks. I got rejected and I don't learn anything from it. Or maybe I just feel bad. I was like, that really stinks. And I don't want to dig into that because it's uncomfortable. That is a waste. We just went through this experience, had the opportunity to learn something, so it's worthwhile to also reflect on that and take that learning. Now, of course, this is not binary. It's not like, people are not reflecting or they are reflecting. It's also about asking the right questions and the right intensity, the right amount of questions. But that is something that we will get into in a little bit. So I hope that just sort of explains what reflection is and also why it is valuable. It's so valuable even that reflection is one of the dedicated phases in the circle of growth. Now, the circle of growth is the fundamental framework that underlies the notion of life system. So let's briefly explore that one more time. We start with insight. This is the why. Why are we doing the things that we do? Then we turn those insights into plans. If that is what I want to do, how am I going to do it? Then after that, we structure all of our knowledge flows in such a way that we can actually have the ability, have the capacity to execute on those plans. Then after that, we review all of our systems, all of our processes to see if everything is still working. And then the last step is to reflect. Reflect on the thing that we did and ask ourselves the question, did we actually get closer to the place where we wanted to go? But also ask ourselves the question, is that still the place that I want to go through? And then we take this reflection and we turn it into new insight. And this is very important. So we don't just reflect on the things that we did. We don't just ask ourselves the question, but then we also take those findings and translate those into new insight, which then helps us to take better action into the future. And that is why we have this reflection phase and why it's such a essential part of this system. And it's, I think, the one that's most overlooked in our productivity culture, in our Western get better culture. It's all about planning. It's all about getting better structures, being more efficient, getting more shit done. But we don't often enough stop to think about, are those things actually the things that we want to be doing, right? We need to bring into alignment who we are with what we do. And to understand who we are, we need this reflection phase. Okay, that being said, there's sort of 5 different buckets of things that we can reflect on. And we already discussed a few here in the circle of growth, but let's just look at these 5 core parts. The first one is desire. This is what we want. What do we want to do? What do we want to achieve? What do we want to be? Maybe my desire is to take a nice holiday into the mountains. Well, then the question becomes, why do I want to do that? So after the what comes the why. Why do I want to go into the mountains? Well, maybe I've been feeling overwhelmed, overworked, stressed out. Okay, that could be a good motivation, but then the question becomes, is this desire that I have the best way to actually channel that motivation? So we can repeat this cycle as many times as we want until we land on a desire that actually matches this motivation best. So maybe I come to the conclusion here that going to the mountains is a bit too much. It takes too much planning that will just stress me out even more. Instead, what I would like to do is go to the spa for a day. I just go to the spa with some friends and just relax. Okay, now I found this desire. I know why I want to do it. Then the next thing that I want to do is make a planning. How am I going to do it? So for the spa day, I will need to reserve a spot at the spa. I will need to arrange transportation, and perhaps I want to invite some friends and family to join me. So we have this thing that we want to do, then we plan how are we going to do it. And once we've created this plan, then we move into execution, right? We do it. And as you can see, these things are also echoed in the circle of growth, right? These have a lot of overlap with the phases of the circle of growth. And then we execute on the thing that we did, and then ultimately that culminates in the outcome, the actual experience that we end up having. Now, we could reflect on all these separate things. I could reflect on this desire. What is this desire? Why do I have this desire? Is this desire really the thing that is important to me? But I could also reflect on the planning. Is the thing that I did actually the most effective thing to do? Could I have made the planning better, more efficient? Could I have involved other people in this planning? I can reflect on the execution. How did I actually show up in this moment, in this thing that I was doing? How was my behavior, my thoughts, my speech? But I could also reflect on the outcome. What was the result of everything, right? These are all separate things that we can reflect on. Now, a tricky question that arises is then, how much time are we going to spend reflecting and how much time are we going to spend actually doing? And that is something that we're going to explore in a little bit. But first, I want to give you a little more context, both about the importance of reflection and also about how it adds value in this process. So let's have a look at this graph over here, in which we're going to measure the success that we have at something over time. Now, the first step is always to understand, where do we start? We are always starting something. And the only way for us to set goals that make sense, to move into a direction that makes sense, is when we understand where we currently are, right? For example, if my goal is to run a 10K, that goal is going to be very different depending on my starting point. Let's say, for example, that I just trained for a marathon. Doing this 10K run is going to be peanuts. It's not even really a goal. I can just go out and do it. But let's say, for example, that I am paralyzed from the waist down. I'm living in a wheelchair. I can quite literally not run a 10K. I could maybe ride a 10K, but it will be impossible for me to reach this goal. So all of that depends on the place where we start, right? So this part of reflection is already very important. It's the preemptive reflection. Before we even go do something, ask ourselves, okay, where am I currently standing? Then after the starting point, we have a goal, right? This is the place where we are planning to go. This is the achievement or the thing or the whatever. It's the goal. It's the place that we orient ourselves into. Now, once we start moving towards that goal, ultimately, as time progresses, we will get to a certain result, right? So we've been doing this thing, we've been trying to move towards that goal, but then we took some actions and ultimately we ended up at this result over here. Now, what you can see is that the result is not as high as the initial goal that we set. And the gap that arises between these two is what we call the production capacity gap. Now, if you've seen the project tracker video, we had a very deep exploration of production capacity. And production capacity is basically the combination of our knowledge and our execution. So it's knowing the right thing to do and actually doing it. So if this was the goal, if this is where we wanted to go, we either lacked the right information or we didn't take the right actions, or we didn't take enough actions, right? So there's a gap here, which we call the production capacity gap. This means that if in the future we want to reach that goal, we should have enough production capacity. Otherwise, our result will always be less than the initial goal that we set. But there is another gap, namely the gap between the initial goal that we set and the potential max capacity that we have. Let's say, for example, that I have a goal of running a marathon. That goal already seems very audacious. That's something that I want to do. But maybe at this point, I didn't realize that what I actually wanted to do was a triathlon, because I don't just like running, I also like swimming, and I also like biking. So instead of training for a full marathon, maybe I just want to train for a half triathlon. Now, to outward appearances, this isn't necessarily better in some way, but it's about our experience. It's our personal vision on what success is. And I could have done something that was more enriching, more nourishing, more successful for me had I set the optimal goal, right? My maximal potential of success. And the gap between the goals that I set and the maximal potential that I could reach in this given time, that is what we call the wisdom gap. This is a lack of wisdom, a lack of insight. I don't know myself well enough to know what it is that I truly want. And that is why we have reflection. Reflection is all about trying to figure out what it is that I truly want. It's about closing that wisdom gap so that I know what my personal maximal potential is, and then I can actually set a goal to try to reach that potential. So from this place, right, we've reached this result over here, so this is going to be our new starting point. We can then once again do the exact same thing. We start over here, we set a goal for ourselves, but what might also happen is that I set a goal that is lower than the result that I actually got, right? Maybe my goal is to start a business and to earn 10,000 euros. And all of a sudden, this business turns out to be really awesome and just takes off and actually earns me 10 times that. In that case, the result was higher than the initial goal that we set. We get a negative gap in the production capacity. But important to note here is that we will never have a result that is higher than our potential, because this, by definition, is the maximum potential that we have. It's a perfect thing, and perfection is something that can never be reached. So this is sort of a motivator, an inspirator, but not something to be reached. There's always more potential. So this wisdom gap, the gap between the goal and the potential, is something that we can always grow in. And that is why reflection is so important, because it helps us fill this gap. It helps us to live a life that's more fulfilling, more successful by our own definition. Okay, that being said, like I mentioned before, there is always a trade-off when we are reflecting, because there's all these different things, all these different gaps that we could be reflecting on, but we only have so much time in the day. And if we were to only sit still and reflect, nothing much is going to happen in the real world. Now, of course, there's people that do this, right? There's monks that just sit in a cave for 30 years, meditating, just continuously reflecting, observing, maybe that is a very good strategy to take. But I'm assuming that most of the people watching this video are like me. You want to get a better insight into yourself. You want to get a better understanding of yourself, but you also want to do things in the real world, right? You want to go out there and actually create something. The moment we want to do both of these things, there's going to be this tension between reflecting and going inward and actually going outward. So we need to find the right balance. How much time am I going to reflect on the things that I did? And how much time am I actually going to do them? And we also need to ask ourselves the question, is me reflecting on this thing and thinking about it now actually a way to sort of circumvent not having the courage or the balls to go out and do it, right? Am I distracting myself through reflection? And we also need to think if we're actually asking the right questions. Are we focusing on the right gaps, right? Because time is limited. And if we're asking the wrong questions, right? Maybe I'm asking myself, am I really beautiful enough? Am I really good enough to be loved? I can ask myself all these negative questions that don't actually lead somewhere. That is also a waste of time and resources. There are so many things to take into consideration. And luckily for you, many of those things have been taken into consideration and have been integrated into this Notion system. And later on, we'll also explore some of those practical things that you can do to have an effective and thorough reflection. Because at the end of the day, principle number one, I say this almost every single video, is bringing into alignment who we are with what we do. We want to know who we are. We want to know what is important to me. And then based on what is important to me, we take action. And then we reflect on that action, get a better understanding. And this is just continuously. We're doing this our entire fucking life. This never stops, right? We're always trying to get a better understanding of who it is that we truly are and then acting upon that thing. Let's wrap up by looking at 6 practical tips that you can apply to your own life to improve your reflection. The first one is to keep it fresh. It is very easy for reflection to become a routine. And I don't mean routine in a good way here, not just a habit, but it becomes a routine where it's no longer about me genuinely answering the question, but it becomes about me just ticking off the box, right? Let's say, for example, every morning I ask myself the question, how am I feeling today? At some point, I might transition from actually trying to tune in with how I'm feeling to just simply answering the question. And then I can say to myself, check the box, I reflected, mission done. That is not what we want to do. Reflection is a genuine inquiry into how we're feeling. So we want to keep it fresh. Maybe ask ourselves a different question. Maybe reflect a different time of day. Maybe just skip one day of reflecting if we're not really feeling it, right? We want to keep the reflection fresh so that it is genuine. Then the second thing that we can do is to make it multimodal. Now, within the Notion.life system, most reflections are written, but I would strongly encourage you to also reflect in different formats. One of my personal favorites is to just turn on the camera, grab a mic, and just riff with myself. Sometimes I'll be talking to myself for an hour, just reflecting out loud, as if I was talking to a very close confidant, right? So we can write, we can speak, we can have conversations with other people. There's all these different modalities that we can use to reflection. I would encourage you to try out different ones. Another thing that we can do is get feedback from other people. Earlier, I mentioned we can never reflect on other people because we're always reflecting on the things that we do, the things that we experience. But what we can do is ask other people for feedback on how they perceive us. And then based on their perception, I can reflect, okay, what is my role in that? Does that resonate? Is there maybe a gap between what that person sees and what I see? So we can use this feedback from other people as a prompt to get a better understanding of how we show up in the world. The next one is creating a comfortable environment to reflect in. Reflecting on a deep level can be hard. It can be very nourishing, but it can also be very confronting, right? We're digging through a lot of the deep stuff that is happening inside of us. So it can help to have a comfortable environment. Maybe we have our favorite beverage. Maybe we're sitting in a space where we feel comfortable, at ease, where we cannot be disturbed by anyone. Having this environment allows us to really go deep. So I would definitely encourage you, especially for the deeper reflections, the weekly, the monthly, the yearly reflections, to really have that environment in which we feel comfortable to do this reflection. Then next up, I would encourage you to be honest. Write your reflections as if they are for your eyes alone. We're not trying to perform here. There's not a performative element. We're not doing this for other people. We're not doing this to brag and to boast to other people about how much we've reflected and all these things, or to share these texts and show like, wow, so grand. No, we're doing this for ourselves. This reflection is for ourselves. It's for our eyes alone. It's for our mind alone. So be honest with yourself. Don't sugarcoat things. Don't be overly harsh or judgmental, but be honest, because that is where the real growth is gained, right? It's from truth and honesty that we get real growth. And then my last thing would be kind to yourself and enjoy the process. Reflection can be considered building a friendship with yourself, right? And at the end of the day, you are the person that you spend the most time with. You are the person that you spend every day of your life with. And taking the time to reflect is taking the time to improve that relationship that we have with ourselves. And just like we would be kind towards a friend that is reflecting on something deep, just like we would be kind to a child or a family member, we also want to be kind to ourselves. We want to be understanding. We want to be honest, but also kind and understanding. And then enjoy the process, because it's very enjoyable once you get that dialogue going with yourself, once you get really deep into all these insights and things are just cascading in your mind. It's an enjoyable process. So try to also find that joy in reflection. Don't see it as a task. Don't see it as this tense thing that needs to happen. No, see it as this invitation to get to know yourself better and enjoy the process. Let us dive into Notion. Now, I created a little list of what we need to do to make this reflection work inside of the system. The first thing that we want to do is that we want to create a template for each of the Notion of Life elements that require reflection. We then want to have an organized central database in which we can store all of these reflections. Then we want to have reflection questions that actually prompt a reflection, right? Like I mentioned earlier, we want to ask ourselves the right questions. We want to organize all these questions in a central place so that we can easily filter and retrieve them. And then ultimately we want to use all those reflections and layer them on top of each other in our review cycles so that we can start spotting patterns in our reflections. So let's start by having a look at the different elements that require reflection questions. So the first thing that I'm going to do, as always, is navigate into the database collection zone, and then over here, you can see all of these different elements that make up the system. Now, let's, for example, open up this weekly review. If I were to go into this weekly review template, you can see over here that we have a bunch of reflection questions. These are reflections for the upcoming week, but we also have our reflection questions for the previous week. What am I particularly grateful for? What was challenging? What was something that went well? These are all questions that we can ask ourselves during the weekly review. But just like we have questions in the weekly review, we also have questions when we start a new project, right? What is the purpose of my project, the sacrifice that we need to make? And these are all things that we've already explored in previous videos, right? In these videos, I showed you that there's these reflection questions. So what we want to do is to get these reflection questions into the template. But the question then is, how are we going to do this? The simplest way to do this is we could simply create a new template, right? So let's say, for example, we're doing this inside the project tracker. We're making this new project tracker template, and then I ask myself this question: why do I want to do this project? And when can I consider this project to be done, right? These would be two reflection questions I could ask myself. Temporary template, and then whenever I generate this template, boom, it will ask me these two questions. And then over here I can write down my answers. This works, but the problem here is that it's going to be very difficult to retrieve the answers that we gave at a later stage. And the power of this Notion of Life system is that we can filter through all of these reflections and that we can layer them on top of each other, that over time we can start seeing patterns in them. So in order to do that, what we need is a central database, right? Principle number 7, database first design. We want to store all of our reflections in a central database. So instead of having these questions like this, we want to have a reflections database. So let's say, for example, I would just create that one over here. I'm going to say reflections. This database is going to hold all of my reflections. So I'm just going to put this page to full width for a moment. And the first thing I'm going to do is say this one is going to be the reflection name. Then over here, I'm going to add some writing space. And then the last thing that I need is the reflection question. So I'm going to create this, select over here, I'm going to say question, and then over here I could have this question. What do I need for this project? And when will this project be a success? Okay. Now I have this question over here, then over here I can write my answer to this question, and then give this a short little name and say, this was my answer. And the reason why we have this separate writing space is because if you just write your reflection inside of here, this page is going to become very bloated. And when I open this over here, you can see this title is going to be very bloated. So instead, what I usually do is I have some writing space over here, and I simply write inside of this writing space. Now, I can already hear you thinking, why not just write it inside of the page? Yes, we can also do that, but unfortunately, when we filter through a database, we are not able to filter through the content of the pages, right? So if we want to filter these reflections, it's better to have it in this writing space, because then we can use all the database features that Notion has to also search through this writing space. So that's why I put it in a separate writing property. All right, let me just take some of this text out. Okay, so basically what we're doing here is we're answering these questions inside of a database. And then over time, as I've answered this question multiple times, I could filter this database and say, only show me the reflections that I answered for this particular question. And that is why it's so powerful to put all of our reflections in a database. Because imagine using this system for multiple months or multiple years even. We can filter on a question and see the answer that we gave to this particular question over that long period of time. And that's when we can start spotting patterns. We start spotting patterns in our behaviors, in how we feel, in our experiences. And that is where a lot of the value comes from. So nice. We created a database, we have these questions, we have this reflection, but now a problem arises because inside of the Notion of Life system, there is over 100 different reflection questions. And if we're going to put all these reflection questions in the select menu, it's going to become absolutely huge. So what we want to do is we want to create a separate database in which we have all of our reflection questions. So let's have a look at that one. Just going to delete this over here. Going to go back into the database collection zone. And then over here, you can see the reflection questions database. Inside this database are all of the reflection questions inside the entire Notion of Life system. And just for this video, I created this view over here, and you can just see how many different questions are in there. And having all these questions in that one little select property is definitely not going to work. Here, 124 questions. That is why we have this separate database. And over here, I've categorized all of these questions by the element that they belong to, and then, if necessary, also by the subcategory within that element, right? So for the daily review, for example, we have our startup questions, and we have our shutdown questions. For the weekly review, we have the questions for the upcoming week and the questions for this week. For the project tracker, we have the questions for the purpose of the project, the sacrifice, and these have all been covered in the respective videos, right? We covered this in the project tracker video, we covered this in the weekly review video, but as you can see over here, all of the questions are stored in a central database. Now, the next thing that we then need to do is to make sure that when we create a reflection, that it is linked to the proper question. So let's go back into the database collection zone. And then over here, we have the reflections database. Now, I'm going to warn you beforehand. This is the most complex part of the whole Notion of Life system. The way these two databases are structured and set up, it's very complex. I'm going to try to explain it as well as I can. If it's not clear, let me know I can try to create some separate content, but I'm going to do my best. Just be warned, this can get quite complex. This database over here is where we have all of our reflections. So the actual reflections that we write on a daily basis. If this video is valuable to you, then please like and subscribe down below. It really does help. Let's take, for example, the reflection that we made inside this reflections database. And one of the reflections that we made is that today I am feeling a bit down. That is the reflection. That is the thing that I write down. Then over here, I can see this is the answer to the question daily morning journaling. That is my reflection prompt. And then based on this question, I create this reflection. So this over here is what we earlier put in the select tag, but now instead of that being a select tag, it is a relationship to this reflection questions database, right? This database I just showed you with all of these questions in it, we relate that to the actual reflections database so that we can then say, this reflection that I made is related to that question. And if I were to open this one, you can see we have all of these reflection questions from the reflection question database that we could link these answers to. And once again, we can also use that to apply this filter where I say reflection question contains, let's say, for example, daily morning journaling. Boom. Now over here, I see all of the reflections that I made for this specific question, right? So we took these questions, put them in a separate database, then linked this database to our reflections database so that we can now say this entry for my reflection is related to this specific reflection question. Okay, that's step number one. We've now related our reflection questions to the actual reflection that we make. Now, the second thing that we want to do is that we also want to relate the reflection to the proper template in which it has been generated. So over here, you can see that this question of daily morning journaling has been answered on many different days, right? It's been answered in the daily review of February 20th. It's been answered in the February 21st, February 22nd. So this question is being asked in separate templates, right? You could imagine we have a project going on that each project has its own reflections that are made, right? I just want to see the reflections for the purpose of this project. I don't want to see the reflection of the purpose for all the projects. So there's two things that we want to do when we make a reflection. We want to connect the reflection to the right question, which is what I just showed you, but we also want to connect it to the right template. So how do we do that? Let me walk you through it from step one. The first thing that we want to do is we want to connect the reflection that we make to the right reflection question. Now, if I were to make a new reflection here, I don't want to search through this entire database to find the right question. That would be very inefficient, and also that would mean I would have to think about what the question is. And we want to have the opposite, right? We want to have the question there present so that we could just think about the reflection. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a filter that says, okay, the reflection question should contain what were the objectives that I set out for this project. Okay, now I have this question over here, and the cool thing about Notion is whenever I now create a new reflection, because I have this filter on, it's automatically related to this question, right? So if I write my reflection, it's automatically related to this question. Right, so that is step number one. I now have this question over here, and as soon as I answer it, it is going to be related to that reflection. But the second thing that I want to do is relate this reflection to the proper project template. And this is why this reflections database has a relationship to every other database in which we do reflections, right? So we have reflections during our daily review. We have them during our weekly review, during our monthly review, in our project tracker, in our vision goals. These are all elements inside the Notion system that have a template, and inside that template, there are going to be reflection questions, right? So let me, for example, open up this Core Insights database, go to this template, over here you can see these are the reflection questions that we ask for this specific element inside of this template. So throughout this whole system, we have reflection questions everywhere, and they're always embedded inside these different templates. So going back to that reflections database, over here you can see it's related to all of these different databases. Now, for this particular view, we want to relate it to the right project tracker. So what we're going to say over here is that the project tracker needs to contain new project template. We want it to contain the template. Why do we want it to contain the template? Well, I could manually link a question to that specific project. But what is cool about Notion is that when I link it to the template, and I would then actually go into this template, right? And I've done that over here, right? I link it to the template. You can see filter, project tracker contains new project template. The moment I generate this template and actually turn this into a new cool project, this filter over here has automatically changed to where project tracker contains a new cool project. So if we set the filter to the template, whenever we generate that template, the filter is automatically changed. Now, had I, for example, not done that beforehand, right? Let's say in this template, I actually just set it to this dummy entry, anotion.life, boom. And now I were to create this template. What will happen after it loads, because let's call this one new cool project again. What will happen is that over here, you see it's already showing these reflections from this different project, which makes sense because the filter is set to contain dummy project. And I would then have to go manually in here, new cool project, remove this. So that would take a lot of time. I would have to reapply these filters every single time I generate a template. So that is why always we set this filter to the template. I'm just going to change that back. I'm going to say new project template. I'm going to change this filter back to saying where it contains template. Boom. Okay. So now we have done that, which means that whenever we create a reflection in here, it will automatically be linked to the reflection questions, and it will automatically be linked to the proper project tracker. So the next thing that we want to do is to add some more reflection questions to this view, because we don't just have one question in there. Maybe we have 3 or 4 questions that we want to ask all in one go. So for now, I'm just going to say, which vision goal does this contribute to? And how does it contribute to that vision goal? And by doing this, we now make it so that all of these reflection questions will be displayed in this view. So now when I create a new reflection, it could also be linked to which vision goal does it relate to. And then I'm going to remove number 1. And you see this question here stays because we just changed this filter to also include this particular question. But a problem arises. If you paid attention, you see that when I create a new reflection right now, it is automatically linked to this first question from the filter. And we don't want that. We want to be able to create this reflection and instantly start writing. Otherwise, we would have to go in here, find the right one, and then, oh, accidentally misclick, boom, we have to refilter it, have to go back. It's a lot of work. So how do we solve for this issue? Well, that's where the next step comes in. What we want to do is we want to take this database and we want to group it by reflection question. And I'm going to show you what that does. So I'm going to say, group this database by reflection question. And now you can see that it creates these different sections in the database, which are all the entries related to a specific question. So this entry right here is related to this question. That's why it's grouped over here. If I were to relate it to the third one we have over here, you can see this new category pops up. And we could have multiple ones in here. But the cool thing now is that whenever I create an entry in a specific group, it is automatically related to the right question. So instead of having to do the question manually, when I create a new reflection over here, it's automatically linked to this question. And when I create it over here, it's automatically linked to this question. So now we don't have to manually change that question. And of course, because we also have this template filter, it's also related to this project tracker template, right? So we're now already assigning two things automatically, which is a really great start. Now, this over here looks a little bit chaotic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the layout and I'm going to turn this into a list layout. And then maybe add the property of the date that the reflection is created. And like this, the whole thing already looks much, much cleaner. And whenever I'm going to do my reflection, I can simply pop open this bad boy and make a new reflection over here. Then I can open this and I can use the writing space to make a deeper reflection. This is the core setup of how all the reflection questions are resurfaced throughout the system. Now there's a few more things that we need to do, because the moment I would delete all of these pages, this one is going to disappear from the view. Now it's going to be in this hidden group, so I could open it up, right? Let's do all of these. Could open them up, and then inside the grouping, I could arrange them, set this to manual, and then put them one question, second question, third question. And this might already look great. You might be like, yeah, this works. If this is what I see in my template, I can create this new entry, and just like that, it would work. Unfortunately, there is a bug in Notion that if you just organize things like this and you open it up in a template, the grouping gets all mashed up, the whole thing breaks down. I tried building this, I have no clue why this happens, so we need to fix this bug. The way we're going to do this is I'm just for now going to delete this filter over here, and then I'm going to turn this one into an advanced filter. So the first thing that we said is the reflection that we make needs to contain these reflection questions, right? It's only going to show us reflections that contain these reflection questions. And then the next filter that I'm going to make is going to say, and the project tracker contains the project's template. So it's only going to show us the questions related to this specific template. But you can see over here, if I do that, I get these hidden groups because no reflections are currently related to this template because it's always generated anew. So it's always going to hide these groups. So in order to help us still see the questions, we add one more filter. So we're going to make this into a separate group, and we're going to say, okay, and it needs to show the questions that are related to this template, or the reflection itself contains this X symbol. Boom. And now I'm going to save that one. And now you can see that actually these questions are being displayed over here. Now, how does this work? This is a little workaround that I created. Basically what I've done is that whenever there is a question inside of this database, they're always related to one of these X's. Now, these X's are different pages. It's not just one page named X. It's actually a different page named X, and each one of them is related just to the questions that I want to show, right? So this one is related to these two questions. This one over here is related to these three questions. Then this one over here is related to these four questions. So we do this so that whenever we create a view, it only shows these questions that are related to this page over here, right? So when we go back into our reflections database, and let's, for example, go to our daily shutdown, over here you can see we have this filter, which says the reflection questions need to contain one of these three questions. It needs to contain this daily review template, or it needs to contain this X. And over here you can see it contains this X, and this X is related to all of these questions. If I were to remove one of these questions over here, you can see it also disappears from the view. So that's why we all relate them to this X. Now, if I were to add another page, for example, one from the project tracker, that one's now also going to show here because this reflection of X does indeed contain these questions. And because it contains those questions, right? The reflection contains those questions. It's also going to show any other thing that is related to this particular page, right? So one page is connected to even just one of these questions, right? Even if I would remove these two, the other one is going to stay, because in this filter, we just told it, show us all of the reflections that contain one of these questions and this X. So that is why it's important for us to only have the page with the questions that we want to answer. Now, this is very complicated. I'm aware of this. Just know that it works this way. And just like that, we have created a reflection view. And not only have we created one reflection view, no, we created a whole bunch. Every single view that you see in the system is created in the main database. Now, this takes a lot of time to set up. If you want to do it, all power to you. If you want to get straight access, you can also buy this template, have everything there. But this is just how it works. We create these views. Easiest way to create a new one is to duplicate it and then just simply change the filter to match the questions for this new tab. But I've already done everything. Over here, we have all of these views for the separate templates. Okay, and now what we can do, we open our project tracker template. And then over here, you can already see we have all these views. And I could just easily add one. Let's say, for example, I deleted the purpose view. I can simply go here, empty view, open this reflections database that we just created. Go to that view, go to the purpose, simply hide that one, drag it back into place. I'll just remove this little seedling over here. And now the moment when I generate this template, right, I create a new project, new cool project. Awesome. We open that one up. And then we scroll down here and you can see the filter has automatically changed from template to new cool project. And then as we're doing our reflections, I can write it in here. And just like that, we can make reflections in our entire system, and they're all stored in this one central database. Now, what this also allows us to do is that when we have all these reflections, we all put this in this one central database, we can also filter them to show us, for example, all of the reflections that we made in the previous month, right? This is the one we would have in the monthly review, where I would have a filter that says, for these questions that I have been answering during my weekly review, show me all of the reflections that I made in the past month. And we've explored this in the last video, but I'll just show you one more time. When I have my monthly review inside this template, the first thing that I do is I look back on the weekly reflections that I made in the past month. And it just neatly shows them all in one row because we have them in a central database. And I can just look, okay, what was I grateful for in the past month? And week 1, I was grateful for this. Week 2, I was grateful for this. And I can start spotting patterns in real time as it was unfolding. And then I can use this information to make my monthly reflections. And like that, we layer these reflections on top of each other. And that is why having this all in one central database is so freaking powerful. If you want to build the Notion of Life system from scratch using these videos, then all power to you. But as you saw in today's video, some parts of this system take a lot of time to craft. So if you'd rather just start using the system right now, you can go to my website and purchase the template. All of you beautiful people get a 20% discount if you go there right now. However, I never want money to be the reason people cannot get access to my material. So if for whatever reason you currently cannot afford this template, send me an email and we'll arrange something. As mentioned in the beginning of this video, all of the links, resources, and assets mentioned in this video are linked in the description down below. In the next video, we are going to explore the Core Insights database, which is the fundamental part of the insight phase. Now, this video is part of a series, so if you want to watch the whole thing, you can find the playlist on my YouTube channel. And for now, I just want to thank you for watching and wish you a wonderful day.